requires you to strive and to attain, to reach new heights, and to make decisions, to make judgments, to act in this way and not that way, to spend your time doing something productive, to be studying Torah rather than, be out at the pool hall. But on the other hand, some of the deepest teachings of Kabbalah insist that you should reach a point at which you are equanimous. In other words, where your state of mind is not flustered, where you're able to just be there as a receptive vessel. And it's paradoxical because I would say that you have to strive to attain that place of not striving. In other words, you can't just begin by being lazy, by lying in bed and saying, well, it's all the same to me. Doesn't matter if I get up or not. One has to get up, one has to strive, one has to work, one has to be involved in relationship and in productive lifestyle. But one of the great spiritual heights is to reach the place where you can just be, where you don't have to try for another rung, but you can open yourself and be receptive. And that requires meditation. That requires really, putting the world aside, I think for a small amount of time, at least each day, and opening oneself up to the flow of the universe.
What has been your greatest challenge to date with this project, besides the enormity of it, the obvious enormity of it?
I would say to do justice to the beauty, to the lyrical beauty of the Zohar. I want to convey the power of the Zohar, but I don't want to ruin it by making it too simple. I think one of the nicest comments that anyone made after the first couple volumes came out, one reviewer said, "The book is still in Aramaic."
That's great.
Now, it sounds strange because I was putting it in English, but I hope what he meant was that I was able to convey some of the raw power of the original, and I want the translation itself to be somewhat difficult, but then in the commentary to explain it to the reader. And I would say that's one of the great challenges, to find the balance between, writing something in English that will make sense in terms of the translation itself, and yet not dumbing it down, not ruining the original ambiguity of the poetic Aramaic.
I think the modern day Kabbalah merchandising, if you will, could benefit highly from bringing in your books, the Pritzker Edition of the Zohar. And I wonder if you think it will happen, that they will incorporate the work you've done as the rarefied terrain that the Zohar really comes from.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenging book. I've done popular books on Kabbalah. You mentioned the Essential Kabbalah and Another God and the Big Bang. But in this, the Zohar Pritzker Edition, I want to present the Zohar, in all its original beauty and difficulty, and it's a challenging book. I would say that, of the many people who get attracted to Kabbalah, if a small percentage of them then really, delve deeply into the Zohar using my translation, that would be great. It's not something that I think everyone should read. For some people, it just would be too difficult. But you can dip into the book and get something out of it. It's really like jumping into the ocean. So it's a vast undertaking, and one should begin a little bit at a time.
The original criteria to study Kabbalah is that you had to be 40 years old. I know some said you could be younger, but I guess the tradition was 40 years old. You had to have prior rabbinic learning and been married and be emotionally and mentally stable. I was wondering if you still agree with that. Is that still in place, or has anything changed?
Yeah, I mean, as you indicated, some Kabbalists, actually one great Kabbalist, Moses Cordovero, says you should be 20, so 20 rather than 40. I think the point is that one should have reached some level of maturity, and that's really because of the power of the material. but this is really true of all mysticism. When you study mysticism, you're really delving very deeply into the nature of the self. And if you undo the normal understanding of the self prematurely, you could be left, falling into madness. I think there's a very fine line between mystical awareness and madness, because both of them really question the normal understanding of self. So if you're involved in spiritual quest, it's important to have certain safeguards, to begin with a teacher or a companion, to have reached some level of maturity, to have some, emotional stability, to be involved in a relationship with another person. I wouldn't say that's absolutely necessary, but it certainly is helpful. In terms of Kabbalah, the requirement of having already studied for years and years, I don't think it's so important exactly how many years, but it is important to have some basic knowledge of earlier stages of the Jewish tradition. If you open up the Zohar and start reading it, it'll be very, very confusing if you haven't read some of the Bible or some of the rabbinic commentaries on the Bible. I would say what you really need to make sense of the Zohar is some familiarity with the 5 books of Moses and some appreciation of what's called midrash, the rabbinic interpretations of the Bible, because then you can see how the Zohar builds on those earlier stages. And that's what I would say, that it's not so much that the book, is forbidden. I mean, now you can go into a bookstore and find anything. But to make sense of it and to start out on the mystical journey, without to try to avoid the dangers, to try to safeguard yourself against the dangers, it makes sense to begin with some basic learning and to have reached a certain level of maturity and to also be involved in the world, not to leave the world behind. As I said before, Kabbalah insists that you integrate the material and the spiritual. So I think it's good to have work, to have a job, to have your feet on the ground, and then to delve into Kabbalah as a kind of dessert.
You have had probably many Jewish philosophers who have impacted your life and your work. And I was wondering about Moses. How do I pronounce his last name? Maimonides?
Moses Maimonides.
Maimonides.
A very interesting figure. He's known as the Rambam in Hebrew, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, Moses the son of Maimon, or Moses Maimonides. He was probably certainly the greatest Jewish philosopher of the Middle Ages. He died right before, as the Kabbalah was just beginning to emerge in Europe. He died in the year 1204. In other words, and the Zohar was composed probably mostly in the 1270s or 1280s. So the Zohar was not there when Maimonides lived, but Maimonides' teaching was very important for the Kabbalah. Now, sometimes people make the simplistic dichotomy between Moses Maimonides, the great rationalist, and then the Kabbalists, who are all mystics, as if they had nothing to do with one another. But really, that's not the case. Maimonides was such a towering figure, not only in philosophy, but in rabbinic law and in Jewish tradition, that really everyone who knew of him studied him. And all the Kabbalists, you could say, grew up studying Maimonides. Maimonides, even though he's considered a rationalist, also had a very strong contemplative side, and the Kabbalists learned something from that as well. And in fact, one of the main insights of the Kabbalah, that God is Ein Sof, the infinite, that we should try to see beyond the childish images of God, that's very much part of Maimonides' agenda. He wants to see God in a more sophisticated way, in a more abstract way, not to be fooled by the anthropomorphic descriptions, the descriptions of God as if he's in human form. And the Kabbalah, I would say the Kabbalah accepts that element of Maimonides' thought in terms of the ultimate reality of God. Ultimately, God is beyond any physical description. So that view of Maimonides about the nature of God is shared by the Kabbalists in terms of the ultimate reality of God, Ein Sof. Where the Kabbalists differ with Maimonides is that they're not opposed to descriptions of God in human form.